I want to get started. Time is short, and I'm really going to try to make two main points. The first point is about the way in which we frame the issue of immigration reform in a way that is most conducive to building the kind of alliances that we want to talk about building. And the second point is about the way in which we build intentional alliances based on deep-rooted solidarity and not simply transactional relationships based on getting a few darker faces at a press conference, for example. I work at Casa de Maryland, which is an immigrant advocacy organization. We're statewide in Maryland. Our primary base is in the Maryland suburbs of DC, and then we also have an office in Baltimore. And I was fortunate to come into Casa last August and to move into an organization that already had very, very solid relationships with key African-American partners. We work closely with an affiliate of Gamaliel called PRISM, the Partnership for Renewal in Southern and Central Maryland, which organizes a lot of African-American congregations. We work closely with the NAACP chapters across the state. We've worked with a group called the People's Coalition for Police Accountability in Prince George's County. And there are a whole number of other alliances that CASA already had. So I was able to come into an organization with that, with those set of relationships. The Crossing Borders curriculum, which you all see, is also a major tool that we use, that's sort of the centerpiece of what my position was created around. And I've worked closely with Dushad to develop an implementation plan for that curriculum. One part of my job that has taken shape in the last several months, however, has been the effort to formulate the document which I've passed out here, which is called Legalization, Worker Justice, and Economic Recovery, Solutions for, you need one? Here you go. Solutions for immigrants, African Americans, and all workers. Could someone else do that for me while I talk? That'd be great. And the thinking that went into this document can be briefly summed up as follows. We felt that we needed to think very critically about the way to advance an immigrant rights agenda in the context of profound economic crisis. I think the economic crisis creates the potential for communities to find common interests and to say, look, we're all facing incredible hardship because of economic problems that are not our fault, that are caused by policymakers in Washington, that are caused by the inequities of a brutally unequal global economic system. And it creates the potential for people to find common interests and to build solidarity, but it also creates enormous potential for fragmentation and for the divide and conquer logic of racism to take hold, as people are in fact competing for increasingly scarce jobs. They're arguing over whose services are going to be cut instead of talking about expanding services. So I think that the crisis creates both the potential for unity and solidarity and the potential for division. So I think thinking about how to advance an immigrant rights agenda in that context requires a lot of careful thinking and intentionality. We also felt that it was important to think about some of the fundamental reasons why the movement hadn't been as successful as we would have hoped in terms of winning critical allies, especially allies within the African American community. And one of the things that we thought was that we needed to build an immigrant rights movement, a movement for broad legalization for the undocumented that would resonate strongly with African American communities who would see it as in the self-interest of African American workers to actually have greater equality and rights for their immigrant brothers and sisters. And building that kind of movement is challenging. Some of what's proposed in the document I'll just sketch out here. Why not have an immigration reform bill that includes, as part of what it's talking about, some fundamental racial justice measures that would require the federal government to actually investigate issues of racial profiling in the criminal justice system, issues of racism in employment practices. Why not have an immigration reform bill that actually also included job creation measures that would be of benefit to workers regardless of immigration status? Why not have a bill that would include measures to benefit the environment, measures to benefit poor communities, measures that would expand what people see as comprehensive. So our vision was to say that a genuinely comprehensive bill in this climate has to be a bill that addresses the question of economic recovery, it has to address questions of worker justice, and it could actually be a bill that does not include some of the elements seen as most divisive within the immigrant rights movement over the last several years. The conventional logic around immigration reform is that a comprehensive bill will include some form of a path to legalization, some form of a guest worker program, and then some form of relatively draconian enforcement measures that most of us hold our noses to support because we like some of the other stuff. And we actually were thinking that in this political climate, we could push for something better, broader, more inclusive, and more consonant with a broad vision of social justice. And I think that the way in which we frame our issues matters. I think that if you frame issues based on a broad vision of how to build social movements that can fundamentally transform society, instead of based on the sort of narrow question of how to get X number of votes on the floor of Congress, I think you build more successfully over the long term and build real links between different potential social actors. So I want to move into the second point that I want to try to make, which is about alliance building. And I think many of us, if we've been activists for a long time, have been in the situation where you're moving towards a press conference or a rally, and the question arises, we've got to have some African American speakers. Let's have some black immigrants there. We're having immigrants stand on the stage. Let's make sure they're not all Latino. Make sure there are a few Asians. Make sure there are a few darker skinned people. Those things are important, right? It's important that we don't do clumsy stuff, right? That portrays an image of the immigrant rights movement that is narrow and less inclusive. But the question of how to actually get there has to be, we have to do more than look for diversity in the platform behind a press conference and think about how to build relationships of genuine solidarity and trust that allow those things to come naturally and that make those relationships ones that are built over the long term and ones that can sustain struggle. So I think it's important that all of us think about who in our localities we want to be in genuine and deep-rooted partnership with. And we can't just ask for their support when we need it. We have to be there for them when they need our support. So for Casa, we take very seriously our obligation to our African American partners, which are often, quite tragically, much less well-funded than us, have much fewer resources than us, and so we do stuff for them, that we don't get any immediate payback for. I mean, we get called by the NAACP and they ask us, can you produce a press release for us? Can you get this to your media contact? And we willingly do it, day in and day out. The issue of police brutality is one that we took up last fall because we had a Guatemalan immigrant who was actually documented, who was murdered by an off-duty Prince George's County police officer. He was shot. The police lied about the situation. They said he'd been argumentative. We found out that was not true by interviewing the community. So we immediately moved into relationship with people who we'd known for years from the People's Coalition for Police Accountability in Prince George's County, a largely African American group. And we brought African American victims of police brutality to rallies and events. We made this a central part of our activity. We had all of our tenant organizers plaster the community of Langley Park to organize around police brutality and police accountability. And then we formulated a set of demands that we wanted to take to key public officials and use the relationships that we've built to build power for immigrants in the state of Maryland, to actually build power around the question of police accountability. This week, the Prince George's County State's Attorney decided not to prosecute police officers who murdered a man named Ronnie White while he sat in his cell in a Prince George's County jail. And we had an immediate conversation within Casa about what are we as Casa going to do about that. That's not a direct attack on our community, right? But it is something that is of direct self-interest to Casa in terms of taking a stand around and fighting around. And I think that we have to think about what we can do to build those kinds of bonds of solidarity where people know that we are genuinely, we are going to take action and take initiative, not only when our own community is affected, but when our allies and the communities we want to be in alliance with are directly affected. I'm trying to keep to 5 minutes. Is someone timing me?
David, you're over.
I'm over. Okay, so I'll leave it at that, and hopefully we can have some more discussion later.